The scrub brush slipped from Annabeth's raw, bleeding hands and clattered against the wooden floorboards of the Red Rose Saloon, leaving a smear of pink-tinged water that made her stomach turn with the realization that she had been working so hard her palms had split open again. She was 21 years old, but her hands looked like they belonged to a woman twice her age. The skin cracked and weathered from endless hours of scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and doing whatever work she could find in the dusty town of Redemption, Texas, in the summer of 1883. The saloon owner, a harsh-faced woman named Mabel Cunningham, paid her barely enough to keep herself and her baby sister Clara alive. But Annabeth had no choice except to take whatever work she could get, because their parents had died 6 months ago in a wagon accident on the road from San Antonio, leaving her as the sole guardian of 8-year-old Clara. Annabeth picked up the brush again, ignoring the sting of lye soap in her wounds, and continued scrubbing the sticky residue of spilled whiskey and beer from between the floorboards. The saloon smelled of tobacco smoke, cheap perfume, and the sour odor of alcohol that had seeped into the wood over years of hard use. She worked from dawn until well past midnight most days, and even then Mabel would find reasons to dock her pay, claiming the floors were not clean enough or that Annabeth had broken a glass, even when she had not touched the glassware at all. The 25 cents a day she earned was barely enough to pay for the tiny room she and Clara rented above the general store, and there was never enough left over for proper food. Clara was growing thinner by the week, her cheeks hollow and her eyes too large in her small face, and Annabeth felt a constant gnawing fear that she was failing her sister, that she could not provide the life their parents would have wanted for them. The saloon doors swung open, letting in a blast of hot Texas air that stirred up the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight. Annabeth glanced up briefly, then returned her attention to her work, knowing that Mabel would scold her if she was caught staring at the customers. But something made her look up again, and she saw a tall man standing in the doorway, his broad-shouldered frame backlit by the sun so that for a moment he seemed like a figure from a dream. He stepped inside, and she could see him more clearly now. A cowboy in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, and there was something in the way he carried himself that spoke of confidence and capability. He walked to the bar, his boots leaving prints in the section of floor Annabeth had just cleaned, but she found she did not mind as much as she usually would have. There was something different about this man, though she could not have said what it was. She watched as he ordered a whiskey from the bartender, then turned to survey the room, his gaze sweeping over the empty tables and chairs, the piano in the corner, and finally landing on Annabeth where she knelt on the floor with her brush and bucket. Their eyes met, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest that she immediately dismissed as foolishness. Men who came into the Red Rose Saloon were not interested in floor scrubbers, and even if they were, Annabeth had no time for such things. Her only concern was keeping Clara fed and safe. The cowboy said something to the bartender, who pointed in Mabel's direction. The man nodded and walked toward the back office, disappearing through the door. Annabeth returned to her scrubbing, though she found her thoughts drifting to the stranger despite her best efforts to focus on her work. There was something in his eyes when he had looked at her, not pity exactly, but a kind of recognition, as though he understood what it meant to work hard for survival. She had nearly finished the main room when Mabel emerged from her office, her face flushed with either anger or excitement. Annabeth could not tell which. "You," Mabel snapped, pointing at Annabeth. "Come here, now." Annabeth scrambled to her feet, her knees aching from hours of kneeling on the hard floor. She wiped her wet hands on her already soaked apron and hurried over to where Mabel stood with the cowboy beside her. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was serious now. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, a thin white line that only added to his rugged appearance. "This is Annabeth," Mabel said to the cowboy, her tone dismissive. "She is the one I mentioned. She works hard enough, I suppose, though she is slow and breaks things." Annabeth felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she kept her eyes down, knowing better than to contradict her employer. The lies about breaking things stung, but she had learned that defending herself only made things worse. "Miss Annabeth," the cowboy said, and his voice was deep and warm with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas born and bred. "My name is James Thornton. I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here, and I am in need of someone to help with the housekeeping and cooking. My previous housekeeper left to get married last month, and I have been managing on my own, but I am not much good at keeping a house clean or preparing decent meals. Mrs. Cunningham here tells me you are a hard worker." Annabeth looked up in surprise, meeting his blue eyes again. "I do my best, sir," she said quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hoarse from lack of use. She did not talk much during her long days of work. "I am offering $2 a week, plus room and board," James said, and Annabeth felt her heart skip a beat. $2 a week was more than 8 times what Mabel paid her, and room and board meant she and Clara would have a place to live and food to eat. It seemed too good to be true, and she immediately wondered what the catch might be. She had heard stories of men who made such offers to desperate women, only to expect things that no decent woman would give. As if reading her thoughts, James added, "The work would be housekeeping, cooking, and general domestic duties. Nothing more. I have a large ranch house with several bedrooms, so you and your sister would have your own space. I understand from Mrs. Cunningham that you are responsible for a young girl." "Yes, sir," Annabeth said, her voice trembling slightly. "Clara is 8 years old. She is a good girl, very quiet and well-behaved. She would not be any trouble." "I am sure she would not," James said, and this time he did smile, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his serious face. "I have plenty of space and I could use the help. It is honest work, Miss Annabeth, and I give you my word that you and your sister would be safe and well treated." Mabel made a sound of impatience. "Well, girl, are you going to take the offer or not? If you are leaving my employment, I need to know now so I can find someone else." Annabeth knew that Mabel would have no trouble finding another desperate woman to exploit, someone else who would work herself to the bone for pennies while Mabel profited from her labor. The decision should have been easy, but fear held her back. What if this was some kind of trick? What if James Thornton was not the honorable man he appeared to be? But then she thought of Clara, of her sister's thin face, and the way she tried so hard not to complain when her stomach ached with hunger, and Annabeth knew she had to take the risk. This might be their only chance for a better life. "I will take the position, Mr. Thornton," she said, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze directly. "When would you like me to start?" "Today, if possible," James said. "I have a wagon outside. You can gather your belongings and I will drive you and your sister out to the ranch this afternoon." "I do not have many belongings," Annabeth admitted. "Just a few clothes and some things that belong to our parents. I can be ready within the hour." "Then it is settled," James said. He turned to Mabel. "Mrs. Cunningham, I appreciate your assistance in this matter. Miss Annabeth, I will wait for you outside. Take your time gathering your things." He tipped his hat to both women and walked out of the saloon, leaving Annabeth standing there with Mabel's disapproving gaze upon her. "You are a fool if you think this will end well," Mabel said sourly. "Mark my words, girl. That man will expect payment of a different kind than honest work, and you will come running back here begging for your old position." "If that happens, I will find work elsewhere," Annabeth said, surprised by her own boldness. "Thank you for the employment, Mrs. Cunningham, but I will not be returning to the Red Rose Saloon." She untied her apron and laid it on the bar, then walked out of the saloon with her head high, even though her legs were shaking. The afternoon sun was blinding after the dimness of the saloon interior, and she had to shade her eyes with her hand as she looked for the general store. She needed to collect Clara and pack their few belongings before James Thornton changed his mind about his generous offer. Clara was sitting on the narrow bed in their tiny room, mending one of her dresses with careful stitches. She looked up as Annabeth burst through the door, her eyes widening with alarm. "Annie, what is wrong? You are never back this early." "Nothing is wrong, sweetheart," Annabeth said, kneeling beside the bed and taking Clara's small hands in her own. "Something wonderful has happened. We are leaving Redemption. We have a new position at our ranch with proper wages and a place to live and enough food to eat." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Truly, you are not teasing me?" "I would never tease about such a thing," Annabeth said, pulling her sister into a tight embrace. "A rancher named Mr. Thornton has hired me to keep his house and cook his meals. He is paying $2 a week plus room and board for both of us. We are going to be all right, Clara, I promise." They packed quickly, stuffing their few possessions into the battered carpet bag their mother had brought from Tennessee when she married their father. There was not much. 2 dresses each, a change of undergarments, their parents' wedding photograph in a tarnished silver frame, their mother's Bible, and a quilt their grandmother had made. Everything they owned in the world fit into one small bag, and Annabeth felt a pang of sorrow at how little remained of the life they had known before the accident. But she pushed the sadness away and focused on the future, on the chance they had been given to start over. James Thornton was waiting beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, just as he had promised. He smiled when he saw them approaching and stepped forward to take their bag, lifting it easily into the back of the wagon. "You must be Clara," he said to Annabeth's sister. "I am pleased to meet you. I hope you will like the ranch. There are horses and cattle and plenty of open space to explore." Clara ducked her head shyly, but Annabeth could see the spark of interest in her eyes. Her sister had always loved animals, and the thought of being around horses would be a dream come true for her. James helped them both up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside them and took the reins. The horses started forward at his command, and soon they were leaving Redemption behind, the dusty buildings growing smaller in the distance. Annabeth looked back only once, then turned her face forward, toward whatever future awaited them at the Thornton Ranch. The journey took nearly 2 hours, following a rough trail that wound through rolling grassland dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but there was a faint breeze that made the heat bearable. James pointed out landmarks along the way: a creek where cattle came to drink, a stand of cottonwood trees that marked the northern boundary of his property, a distant line of hills where he sometimes found strays that had wandered from the herd. He talked easily, his manner relaxed and friendly, and Annabeth found herself beginning to relax as well. There was something reassuring about his presence, a sense of steadiness and competence that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. "How long have you owned the ranch?" she asked, then worried that she was being too familiar, but James did not seem to mind the question. 5 years, he said. "I worked as a ranch hand for nearly a decade, saving every penny I could until I had enough to buy this land and start my own herd. It has been hard work, but it is mine, and that means everything to me. I have about 200 head of cattle now and 3 men who work for me. They are good men, honest and hardworking. You will meet them at supper tonight." "I hope my cooking will be adequate," Annabeth said, feeling a flutter of nervousness. "I am not fancy, but I can prepare basic meals that are filling and nutritious." "That is all I need," James assured her. "My men and I are not looking for fancy cuisine. We just want food that tastes good and sticks to our ribs. Anything will be better than the burned beans and tough beef I have been serving lately." Clara giggled at that, and James grinned at her. "You think that is funny, do you? Well, you are right. My cooking is terrible. Your sister is going to save us all from starvation." By the time the ranch house came into view, the sun was beginning to lower toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house was larger than Annabeth had expected, a two-story structure built of wood and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. There were several outbuildings as well: a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a chicken coop, and what looked like a smokehouse. Everything was well maintained, the fences straight and sturdy, the yard neat. It was clear that James Thornton took pride in his property. He helped them down from the wagon and carried their bag inside, showing them through the front door into a spacious main room with a stone fireplace and comfortable-looking furniture. The house was clean but had a neglected air, as though it had been some time since anyone had given it proper attention. Dust covered the surfaces, and the windows were streaked and dim. "The kitchen is through here," James said, leading them into a large room with a cast-iron stove, a long wooden table, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking supplies. "There is a well just outside the back door, and the root cellar is around the side of the house. I keep it stocked with basics: flour, sugar, salt, coffee, dried beans, and such. There is a smokehouse with bacon and ham, and the chickens provide eggs. Once a month I go into town for supplies, and you can give me a list of anything you need." He showed them the rest of the house: a dining room with a table large enough to seat 8, a small parlor with a few books on a shelf, and upstairs, 4 bedrooms. The largest was clearly his, with a wide bed and a wardrobe. The others were smaller but still comfortable, each with a bed, a dresser, and a window that let in plenty of light. "You and Clara can have these 2 rooms," James said, indicating the 2 bedrooms at the front of the house. "They share a wall, so you will be close to each other. I hope they will be comfortable for you." Annabeth looked around the room that would be hers, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. The bed was covered with a faded but clean quilt, and there was a rag rug on the floor. It was more space and comfort than she had known since her parents died, and she felt tears prickling at her eyes. "It is more than comfortable, Mr. Thornton," she said softly. "It is wonderful, thank you." "Please call me James," he said. "Mr. Thornton makes me feel like an old man." "And there is no need to thank me. You will be working hard to earn your keep, I assure you. Now, I imagine you and Clara would like to settle in and rest a bit before supper. I will be in the barn tending to the horses if you need anything. Supper is usually around 6 o'clock, if that suits you." "That suits me fine," Annabeth said. "I will have a meal ready by then." After James left, Annabeth and Clara explored their new rooms, unpacking their few belongings and marveling at their good fortune. Clara bounced on her bed, testing the mattress, and declared it the most comfortable bed she had ever slept in. Annabeth hung their dresses in the wardrobe and placed their parents' photograph on the dresser, then stood looking at it for a long moment, wishing her mother and father could see how things had turned out, wishing they were still alive to share in this new beginning. But there was no time for sadness. She had a supper to prepare and a job to prove herself worthy of. She washed her face and hands in the basin of water in her room, changed into her other dress, which was slightly less worn than the one she had been wearing, and headed downstairs to the kitchen with Clara following behind her. The kitchen was well equipped, and Annabeth quickly found everything she needed. She built up the fire in the stove, filled a pot with water from the well, and began preparing a simple but hearty meal. There was a ham in the smokehouse, which she sliced and set to frying in a cast-iron skillet. She found potatoes in the root cellar and set them to boiling, then mixed up a batch of biscuits using flour, lard, and buttermilk from the cold box. Clara helped by setting the table in the dining room, carefully placing plates and utensils at each seat. As the food cooked, Annabeth felt a sense of contentment that she had not experienced in a very long time. The kitchen was warm and filled with good smells, and she had everything she needed to create a proper meal. It felt right somehow, working in this space, and she allowed herself to hope that this new position might truly be the fresh start she and Clara so desperately needed. James came in just as she was pulling the biscuits from the oven, their tops golden brown and steaming. He had washed up and changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was still damp from the water. "That smells incredible," he said, his eyes lighting up. "It has been far too long since this house had the smell of home cooking in it." "It is nothing fancy," Annabeth said, suddenly feeling shy. "Just fried ham, boiled potatoes, and biscuits. I found some green beans in the root cellar and cooked those as well." "It is a feast," James said firmly. "Let me call the men in and we will eat." He went out to the bunkhouse and returned a few minutes later with 3 men trailing behind him. They were all young, in their 20s or early 30s, with the lean, weathered look of men who spent their days working outdoors. James introduced them as they filed into the dining room. Tom Garrett, a cheerful man with sandy hair and freckles, Miguel Rodriguez, who had dark eyes and a quiet manner, and Sam Cooper, who was tall and lanky with a ready grin. The men removed their hats and nodded politely to Annabeth and Clara, then took their seats at the table. Annabeth brought out the platters of food and set them in the center of the table, then took a seat beside Clara at the far end. There was a moment of awkward silence, and then James picked up the serving fork and began filling his plate, and the others followed suit. The meal was consumed with enthusiasm and many compliments on Annabeth's cooking. The men ate with the appetite of those who worked hard physically all day, and Annabeth found herself smiling at their obvious enjoyment. It felt good to feed people who appreciated the effort, so different from the thankless drudgery at the Red Rose Saloon. After supper, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, thanking Annabeth profusely for the meal. James helped her clear the table, insisting that it was only fair since she had done all the cooking. Clara was yawning, exhausted from the eventful day, and Annabeth sent her up to bed with a kiss on the forehead. "She is a sweet child," James said as they worked together in the kitchen, Annabeth washing the dishes while he dried them and put them away. "You have done well raising her on your own." "I have done the best I could," Annabeth said. "It has not been easy. Our parents died 6 months ago, and everything since then has been a struggle. I was so afraid I would not be able to keep us together, that Clara would end up in an orphanage or with strangers who did not love her." "That will not happen now," James said quietly. "You have a position here for as long as you want it, Annabeth. I meant what I said about this being honest work. I will never take advantage of you or make you feel unsafe. You have my word on that." Annabeth looked up at him, meeting his steady blue gaze, and she believed him. There was something in his eyes that spoke of integrity and honor, qualities that were rare in her experience. "Thank you, James," she said. "You have given us a chance at a real life, and I will work hard to show you that your faith in us is not misplaced." "I have no doubt of that," he said, and his smile was warm and genuine. That night, as Annabeth lay in her comfortable bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for months. She had taken a risk in accepting James Thornton's offer, but her instincts told her it had been the right decision. For the first time since her parents died, she allowed herself to believe that she and Clara might actually be all right, that they might have found a place where they belonged. The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Annabeth rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for James and his ranch hands. Eggs from the chickens, bacon or ham, biscuits or pancakes, and strong coffee. After the men headed out to work, she would clean the house, which was large enough to keep her occupied for several hours each day. She scrubbed floors and washed windows, beat the dust from rugs and curtains, polished furniture, and swept away cobwebs. The house had been neglected for weeks, and it took time to bring it back to proper order, but Annabeth found satisfaction in the work. Unlike the Red Rose Saloon, this was a home, and making it clean and comfortable felt worthwhile. Clara helped with the lighter tasks, dusting furniture and gathering eggs from the chicken coop. She seemed to blossom in the ranch environment, her cheeks growing pink and her eyes bright with happiness. She spent hours watching the horses in the corral, and James noticed her interest and began teaching her about the animals, showing her how to approach them gently and how to brush their coats until they gleamed. Annabeth prepared a substantial dinner at midday, which was the main meal on the ranch. The men worked hard and needed good food to sustain them, and she made sure they had plenty. Beef stew, roast chicken, pork chops with gravy, always accompanied by vegetables and fresh bread. In the evenings, she served a lighter supper, usually leftovers from dinner or something simple like soup and cornbread. She found herself looking forward to mealtimes, not just because she enjoyed cooking, but because she enjoyed the company. The ranch hands were respectful and friendly, always ready with a joke or a story about their day's work. And James was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a genuine interest in her opinions. He often stayed in the kitchen after the others had left, helping her with the dishes and talking about everything from the cattle market to books to their childhoods. Annabeth learned that James had grown up on a small farm in East Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had struggled to make ends meet, and James had left home at 16 to find work, sending money back whenever he could. He had worked on various ranches throughout Texas, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and land management, until he finally had enough saved to buy his own property. He had never married, though he was now 26 years old, because he had been too focused on building his ranch to think about settling down with a wife. "I suppose I always thought there would be time for that later," he said one evening as they worked together in the kitchen. "But now I am beginning to wonder if I let the important things pass me by while I was chasing after land and cattle." "You are still young," Annabeth said, surprised by the wistful note in his voice. "There is plenty of time yet for a family if that is what you want." "I suppose," James said, but he did not sound convinced. He looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face, and Annabeth felt that strange flutter in her chest again, the one she had felt the first time she saw him. She looked away quickly, focusing on the plate she was washing, telling herself not to be foolish. James Thornton was her employer, nothing more, and it would be a mistake to imagine otherwise. But over the weeks that followed, she found it increasingly difficult to ignore the way her heart quickened when he entered a room, or the warmth she felt when he smiled at her, or the way she found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day. She tried to dismiss these feelings as simple gratitude for his kindness, but deep down she knew it was more than that. She was beginning to care for James in a way that went far beyond the relationship between an employer and an employee. She told herself it was impossible, that nothing could come of such feelings. She was a scrub girl, a woman with no family and no prospects beyond the position he had given her out of charity. James could have his pick of respectable young women from good families, women with education and manners and proper upbringings. Why would he ever look twice at someone like her? But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and tender in his eyes that made her wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, he might feel something for her as well. She told herself she was imagining things, seeing what she wanted to see rather than what was really there. But the hope would not quite die, no matter how hard she tried to smother it. One afternoon in late September, about 6 weeks after Annabeth and Clara had come to the ranch, a severe storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the air grew heavy and still with that peculiar tension that preceded violent weather. James sent the ranch hands to secure the animals and make sure all the outbuildings were battened down, then came into the house to check on Annabeth and Clara. "There is a bad storm coming," he said, his face serious. "I want you both to stay inside until it passes. If it gets really bad, there is a root cellar outside the back door that we can use for shelter. Texas storms can be dangerous, especially this time of year." "We will be careful," Annabeth promised. Clara pressed close to her side, her eyes wide with apprehension as she watched the dark clouds rolling closer. The storm hit with terrifying force. Rain hammered against the windows, driven by wind that howled around the house like a living thing. Thunder cracked so loudly that it shook the walls, and lightning split the sky in brilliant white forks that lit up the landscape in brief, stark flashes. Clara clung to Annabeth, trembling with fear, and Annabeth held her sister close, murmuring reassurances she did not quite feel herself. James came into the parlor where they huddled together on the sofa, his expression calm but alert. "The storm is getting worse," he said. "I think we should move to the root cellar just to be safe. I have seen storms like this spawn tornadoes, and I would rather not take any chances." They hurried through the kitchen and out the back door, the rain immediately soaking them to the skin despite the short distance to the cellar. James hauled open the heavy wooden door and helped them down the steep steps into the earthen space below. The cellar smelled of damp soil and stored vegetables, and it was dark except for the lantern James had brought with him. He closed the door above them, and the sound of the storm became muffled, though they could still hear the wind roaring overhead. They sat on sacks of potatoes and waited, listening to the storm rage above them. Clara was shaking, whether from cold or fear Annabeth could not tell, and James took off his jacket and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. "It will be all right," he said gently. "This cellar has weathered many storms. We are safe here." Time seemed to stretch in that dark, confined space. Annabeth found herself acutely aware of James sitting beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers, his presence solid and reassuring. When a particularly loud crash of thunder made Clara cry out in fear, James reached across and took Annabeth's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The gesture was meant to comfort, she knew, but it sent a jolt of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the storm raging overhead. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 or 40 minutes, the sound of the wind began to diminish, and the thunder grew more distant. James waited a bit longer to be sure, then climbed the steps and opened the cellar door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the worst of the storm had passed. They emerged into a transformed landscape. Branches and debris littered the yard, and one of the fence rails near the barn had been torn loose. But the house and outbuildings appeared intact, and none of the animals seemed to have been harmed. The ranch hands came out of the bunkhouse, and everyone set about cleaning up the damage and making repairs. Annabeth and Clara went back inside to dry off and change into clean clothes. As Annabeth toweled her wet hair, she caught herself thinking about the moment when James had taken her hand, the warmth of his touch and the way it had made her feel protected and cared for. She told herself again not to read too much into it, that it had been a simple gesture of comfort and nothing more. But the memory lingered, sweet and bittersweet at the same time. That evening, after supper was finished and Clara had gone to bed, James asked Annabeth if she would join him on the front porch. The air was cool and fresh after the storm, washed clean of dust, and the stars were beginning to appear in the clearing sky. They sat in the 2 rocking chairs that occupied the porch, and for a while they simply enjoyed the peaceful evening, the sound of crickets chirping in the grass and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. "I want to thank you for everything you have done here," James said at last, his voice quiet in the darkness. "This house feels like a home again, and it is because of you. You and Clara have brought life back to a place that was feeling empty and lonely." "You have given us so much more than we could ever repay," Annabeth said. "A home, security, kindness. I do not know what would have become of us if you had not offered me that position." "I think we have helped each other," James said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Annabeth, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right words for weeks now, but there never seems to be a right time or a right way to say it." Annabeth's heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" He turned to look at her, and even in the dim light from the window behind them, she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I have feelings for you," he said simply. "I know I should not, that you came here as my employee, and I have no right to complicate things this way. But I cannot help how I feel. You are in my thoughts constantly. The way you care for Clara, the way you take pride in your work, your strength and courage in the face of hardship, your kindness, your smile. Everything about you draws me in. I am falling in love with you, Annabeth, and I needed you to know that. Annabeth felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I thought I was imagining things, she whispered. I thought I was foolish for hoping that you might feel something for me. I have been trying so hard not to care for you, but I cannot help it either. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you offered me a chance at a better life. You are the finest man I have ever known, James. He reached over and took her hand, the same way he had in the storm cellar, but this time the touch was different, charged with emotion and promise. I want to court you properly, he said. I want to give you time to be sure of your feelings, to know that this is real and not just gratitude or proximity. I do not want to rush you or pressure you in any way, but I need you to know where my heart stands. My heart stands in the same place, Annabeth said, her voice trembling with emotion. I would be honored to be courted by you, James, more honored than I can say. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that was both tender and respectful. Then we will take our time and do this right, he said. And when the time comes, if you will have me, I would like to make you my wife. The months that followed were the happiest Annabeth had ever known. James courted her with old-fashioned formality and genuine romance. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, their bright colors a cheerful contrast to the autumn browns and golds of the landscape. He took her and Clara on picnics to a beautiful spot by the creek, where the water ran clear over smooth stones and cottonwood trees provided shade. He read to her in the evenings from the books in his small collection, his deep voice bringing the words to life. He also made sure that everyone understood his intentions were honorable. He spoke to the ranch hands, making it clear that Annabeth was to be treated with the utmost respect as the woman he intended to marry. He took her into town on Sundays for church services, introducing her to the community as his betrothed. Some of the townspeople looked down on her, knowing she had worked at the Red Rose Saloon, but James made it clear that he would not tolerate any disrespect toward Annabeth, and gradually even the most critical tongues were stilled. Clara was delighted by the developing romance between her sister and James. She had grown to adore him during their time at the ranch, and the thought of him becoming her brother-in-law filled her with joy. James, for his part, treated Clara with genuine affection, and Annabeth could see that he would be a wonderful father figure for the girl. As winter approached, James took Annabeth aside one evening and presented her with a ring. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing elaborate, but to Annabeth it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. I know we have not been courting for very long, James said, but I am certain of my feelings. I love you, Annabeth, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Yes, Annabeth said, her voice choked with happy tears. Yes, James, I will marry you. I love you with all my heart. They were married in early December of 1883 in the small church in Redemption. Clara served as Annabeth's attendant, wearing a new dress that James had insisted on buying for her. Tom, Miguel, and Sam stood up with James, and many of the townspeople attended, curious to see the former scrub girl marry the prosperous rancher. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when James kissed his new bride, Annabeth felt as though her heart would burst with happiness. The ranch became truly their home after the wedding. Annabeth moved her belongings into James's room, which became their room, and she woke each morning to find him beside her, his arm draped protectively over her waist. They worked together to make the ranch prosper, with Annabeth managing the household and James overseeing the cattle operation. Clara continued to thrive, growing tall and strong, her love of horses developing into real skill as James taught her to ride and care for the animals. The years passed peacefully and productively. In the spring of 1885, Annabeth gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named Matthew after James's father. Holding her son in her arms, Annabeth marveled at how far she had come from the desperate girl scrubbing floors in a saloon. She had a husband who loved her, a sister who was thriving, and now a child of her own. Her life was fuller and richer than she had ever dreamed possible. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, a tiny girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Rose, and she was doted on by everyone in the household. Clara, now a young woman of 14, proved to be a wonderful help with the babies, and Annabeth was grateful for her sister's loving assistance. James proved to be an excellent father, patient and kind but firm when necessary. He taught Matthew to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he carried Rose on his shoulders around the ranch, showing her the cattle and horses and explaining everything in a way that made even a toddler feel important. Watching him with their children, Annabeth fell in love with him all over again, deeper and more completely than she had thought possible. The ranch prospered under James's management. He was a shrewd businessman but also fair and honest, and his reputation spread throughout the region. Other ranchers came to him for advice, and he was respected as a leader in the community. But he never lost sight of what was truly important. His family always came first, and he made sure Annabeth and the children knew they were loved and cherished. Clara grew into a beautiful young woman, skilled with horses and beloved by everyone who knew her. When she turned 18 in 1893, she married Tom Garrett, James's ranch foreman, who had been courting her patiently for 2 years. The wedding was held at the ranch, with a celebration that lasted well into the night. Annabeth cried happy tears as she watched her baby sister pledge her life to a good man, knowing that Clara would be loved and cared for just as she had been. By the turn of the century, the Thornton Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. James and Annabeth had added 2 more children to their family, another son named Samuel, born in 1890, and a daughter named Grace, born in 1895. The house rang with laughter and activity, and the dinner table was always full, not just with their immediate family but with ranch hands, neighbors, and friends who stopped by. Matthew grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and it was clear he would one day take over the operation. Rose inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's business sense, and she kept the household accounts with meticulous accuracy. Samuel was the adventurous one, always climbing trees or exploring the farthest corners of the property, while Grace was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the animals and landscape. Clara and Tom built a house on the eastern section of the ranch property and started their own family. They had 3 children in quick succession, and the cousins grew up together, as close as siblings. The ranch land was divided so that Tom could run his own herd, and the 2 operations supported each other, with the families remaining close and interdependent. On their 20th wedding anniversary in December of 1903, James took Annabeth back to the spot by the creek where they had picnicked during their courtship. It was winter, and the trees were bare, but the place still held a special beauty. They sat on a blanket James had brought, wrapped in coats against the cold, and he took her hand just as he had done so many times over the years. "Do you remember the day I first saw you?" he asked. "Scrubbing floors in that saloon, your hands raw and bleeding, working yourself to exhaustion to take care of Clara?" "I remember," Annabeth said softly. "I was so tired and so scared, I thought I was going to fail her, that I could not keep us together. I looked at you and saw the strongest person I had ever met," James said. "I saw courage and determination and love. I knew right then that I wanted you in my life, though I did not realize yet that I was already falling in love with you. Asking you to come work for me was the best decision I ever made." "Coming to work for you was the best decision I ever made," Annabeth countered. "You saved us, James. You gave us a life worth living." "We saved each other," James said. "I was lonely and lost, building a ranch but with no one to share it with. You and Clara brought love and laughter into my life. You made everything worthwhile. These past 20 years with you have been the greatest blessing I could have imagined." Annabeth felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you," she said. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I loved you desperately then. You are my heart, James Thornton." He kissed her then, tenderly and thoroughly, and they sat together by the creek as the winter sun sank low in the sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that was richer than either had dreamed possible. As they grew older, James and Annabeth remained devoted partners, working side by side to manage the ranch and raise their children. They faced the challenges that came with operating a large cattle ranch in Texas. Droughts that withered the grass, market downturns that made beef less profitable, occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers over water rights and grazing land. But they faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. The children grew up and began to make their own way in the world. Matthew married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and brought her to live at the main house, preparing to eventually take over the operation from his father. Rose surprised everyone by expressing an interest in going to college, and James and Annabeth scraped together the money to send her to a women's college in Austin, where she studied to become a teacher. Samuel decided he wanted to try his luck in Montana, and though Annabeth wept to see him go, she and James gave him their blessing and enough money to get started with his own small ranch in the north. Grace married a doctor from San Antonio and moved to the city, though she visited the ranch often and always spoke of it as her true home. Clara and Tom's children also grew and thrived. Their oldest son showed a talent for breaking and training horses, and he developed a reputation throughout the region for his skill. Their daughters married well and settled nearby, so the extended family remained close even as the years passed and circumstances changed. James and Annabeth aged gracefully, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with wrinkles earned through years of hard work and laughter. But their love never dimmed. They still held hands as they walked around the ranch property in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same warmth and affection they had felt as newlyweds. On a warm spring evening in 1915, 32 years after Annabeth had first come to the ranch, she and James sat on the front porch in their rocking chairs, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Their grandchildren played in the yard, shrieking with laughter as they chased each other through the grass. The sound filled Annabeth's heart with contentment. "Do you ever think about that day in the saloon?" James asked, echoing the question he had posed on their anniversary so many years ago. "When I walked in and saw you scrubbing floors?" "Sometimes," Annabeth admitted. "It seems like a lifetime ago now, like it happened to someone else, but I remember how desperate I felt, how afraid. And I remember the moment you offered me a job, the way hope flickered in my heart for the first time in months. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special," James said. "Something about you called to me, drew me in. I told myself I was just offering you a job because you needed the work and I needed the help. But the truth is, I think even then some part of me recognized you as the person I had been waiting for all my life." "We were meant to find each other," Annabeth said, reaching over to take his hand. "All the pain and struggle that came before, all the hardship and fear, it led me to you. And I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you, with this life we have built together." Matthew came up the porch steps, his own children trailing behind him. "Mama, Papa, supper is ready." Rose sent a telegram saying she will arrive tomorrow for the weekend, and Samuel wrote that he and his family will be coming in June for a visit. The whole family will be together. "That is wonderful news," Annabeth said, her face lighting up. She loved nothing more than having all her children and grandchildren gathered together under one roof, the house filled with noise and activity and love. They went inside for supper, the family gathering around the long table that had witnessed so many meals over the decades. As Annabeth looked around at the faces of those she loved, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had been given. She thought of the frightened, desperate girl she had been, scrubbing floors with bleeding hands, wondering how she would survive. She could hardly believe that girl and the woman she had become were the same person, but they were. She had survived through strength and determination, and she had been given a chance by a good man who saw past her circumstances to the person she truly was. Together, she and James had built something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren and beyond. After supper, as the family dispersed to various activities and the grandchildren were tucked into beds scattered throughout the house, Annabeth and James climbed the stairs to their bedroom. It was the same room they had shared for more than 3 decades, though the furnishings had been updated over the years and the curtains replaced multiple times. They prepared for bed with the comfortable familiarity of long-married couples, moving around each other easily in the space. As they lay in bed, James pulled Annabeth close, her head resting on his shoulder just as it had on countless nights before. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Annabeth whispered back. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, James Thornton. You gave me everything, a home, a family, a life filled with love. I could not have asked for more." They drifted off to sleep holding each other. Two people who had started as employer and employee, become friends, fallen in love, married, raised a family, and built a legacy together. Their story was one of survival and second chances, of kindness and courage, of love that grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. The ranch continued to prosper under Matthew's eventual management, passed down through the generations just as James had always hoped. The Thornton name became synonymous with integrity and success in that part of Texas, and the story of how James and Annabeth met became family legend, told to children and grandchildren as an example of how taking a chance on someone could change lives. When Clara was an old woman herself, she would tell the story to her great-grandchildren, describing how her sister had scrubbed floors until her hands bled, how a cowboy had walked into a saloon and offered them a chance at a better life, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into one of the greatest love stories she had ever witnessed. "Your great-aunt Annabeth and great-uncle James proved that it does not matter where you start in life," Clara would say. "What matters is the choices you make and the people you choose to love. They chose each other and they built a beautiful life together." James and Annabeth lived to see their golden wedding anniversary in 1933, a remarkable achievement that was celebrated with a huge gathering of family and friends. By then they were both in their 70s, their children were middle-aged with children and grandchildren of their own, and the ranch had survived the economic turmoil of the era through careful management, and the strong foundation James had built decades earlier. At the anniversary celebration, surrounded by more than 100 family members and friends, James raised a glass of cider and made a toast. "50 years ago, I walked into a saloon in Redemption and saw a young woman scrubbing floors," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "She was working herself to exhaustion to care for her baby sister, and something about her courage and determination captured my heart. I asked her to come work for me, never dreaming that I was really asking her to share my life. Annabeth, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend, and the mother of my children. Every day with you has been a gift. Here is to 50 years together and to whatever time we have left." Annabeth, her eyes shining with tears, raised her own glass. "James, you saved me when I had nothing and no one except Clara. You saw past what I was doing to who I truly was. You gave me respect and kindness and love, and you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I love you more than words can say, and I thank God every day for sending you into that saloon on that hot summer afternoon." They kissed to thunderous applause and cheering, and the celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared by multiple generations. It was a fitting tribute to a love that had endured and grown stronger through 5 decades of marriage, James passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 78. He died as he had lived, with dignity and grace, surrounded by family in the house he had built. Annabeth held his hand as he took his final breaths, whispering her love and gratitude, promising that she would join him when her own time came. She mourned him deeply, but without despair, knowing that they had been blessed with an extraordinary marriage and a full life together. She lived for another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of the past and offering wisdom gained through a lifetime of experiences. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, her mind clear and her spirit strong. On a summer evening in 1940, Annabeth died quietly in her sleep, in the same bed where she had spent so many happy years with James. She was 83 years old. Her children found her the next morning, a peaceful expression on her face, and they knew she had gone to be reunited with the man she had loved for more than half a century. She was buried beside James on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree that provided shade even on the hottest Texas days. Their headstones were simple but elegant, bearing their names, the dates of their births and deaths, and a single-line inscription that Matthew had chosen. They chose each other, and love was enough. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to the vision and hard work of James Thornton and the woman who had once scrubbed floors to feed her baby sister. Annabeth's descendants thrived, carrying forward the values she and James had instilled: integrity, hard work, compassion, and the understanding that love and family were the greatest treasures anyone could possess. Clara lived to be 97 years old, and in her final years she would sit on her own porch and tell stories about her sister to anyone who would listen. She spoke of Annabeth's courage and strength, of the day a cowboy had changed their lives, and of the beautiful love story that had unfolded on a Texas ranch. "My sister deserved happiness," Clara would say, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "She sacrificed so much for me when we were young, working herself nearly to death to keep us together. And then James came along and saw what I saw, that Annabeth was someone extraordinary, someone worth cherishing. They had a love that most people only dream about, and I was blessed to witness it." The story of Annabeth and James became part of Texas folklore in that region, a tale passed down through generations as an example of how love could grow from the simplest beginning, how a moment of kindness could change everything, and how two people who had both known hardship and loneliness could find each other and build something lasting and beautiful. It was a story that inspired hope in those who heard it, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, life could surprise you with second chances and unexpected blessings. The ranch house still stood more than a century after James had built it, lovingly maintained by each successive generation. The front porch where James and Annabeth had courted and later grown old together was still there, the rocking chairs replaced many times but always present, a symbol of the partnership that had built the family legacy. The oak tree on the hillside where they were buried grew tall and strong, its branches providing shelter for birds and shade for visitors who came to pay their respects to the ancestors who had started it all. From the moment Annabeth had dropped her scrub brush on that saloon floor to the day she died peacefully in her sleep, 57 years later, her life had been transformed by one simple act: a cowboy walking into a saloon and offering her better work and better pay. But what had started as a business transaction had become the greatest love story anyone who knew them had ever witnessed. Proof that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the smallest steps, and that love, when it is true and deep and lasting, can overcome any obstacle and create a legacy that endures long after the lovers themselves have gone. The end.